The floor shook under my feet before the alarms even started, and I knew something was terribly wrong. My name is Lyra Ashworth, and I am the youngest daughter of the Vantry Compact, a small alliance of star systems far from Earth. I was standing on the observation deck of our flagship, watching the stars blur past, when 6 armored figures burst through the emergency hatch and grabbed me before I could even scream. They wore no faces, only dark visors, and they moved with the practiced calm of people who had done this many times before. One of them pressed something cold against my neck, and the world went soft and heavy. The last thing I saw was the ship's lights spinning above me as they carried me away. When I woke up, I was lying on a metal floor inside a narrow storage room. My wrists were bound with a thin cord that cut into my skin every time I moved. 2 guards stood near the door, their weapons resting casually against their shoulders, as if guarding a princess was the most boring job in the galaxy. I tried to steady my breathing. Fear made my thoughts scatter like leaves in wind. I thought of my mother, who would be frantic by now, and I thought of Edmund Whitlock, my tutor, who was probably still buried in some old book back on the ship, unaware that everything had changed. Edmund was not what anyone would call remarkable to look at. He was tall but slightly stooped, with soft brown eyes, and a habit of pushing his glasses up his nose when he was thinking. He taught me history, language, and old Earth poetry. He always spoke gently, always apologized when he interrupted me, always seemed slightly embarrassed by attention. My mother's advisors called him harmless, and I believed them, because everyone believed that about humans. They were clever, yes, but physically unremarkable. Slower, weaker, simple. That belief was about to shatter completely. I do not know how much time passed before I heard footsteps outside the storage room, fast and light, nothing like the heavy stomping of the guards. Then, the door did not open. It simply came apart, as if something enormous had pulled it from its frame with ease, and Edmund stepped through the gap. He looked different. His glasses were gone, his jacket was torn at the shoulder, but it was his eyes that startled me most. They were calm in a way that felt colder than any fear I had ever seen. One guard raised his weapon, but Edmund was already moving. He caught the barrel with one hand and turned it aside so smoothly that it seemed almost gentle, and with his other hand, he touched the guard's shoulder in a way that made the man crumple to the floor without a sound. The second guard barely had time to react before Edmund closed the distance and guided him down just as quietly, the way someone might lower a heavy box instead of dropping it. Neither man moved again. Edmund knelt beside me immediately, his hands surprisingly steady as he loosened the cord around my wrists. His voice, when he finally spoke, was the same gentle voice I had known for years. "Are you hurt, Lyra?" I could only shake my head, too stunned to speak. "Good," he said softly. "Stay close to me. We are not finished yet." I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions, but there was no time. Voices echoed down the corridor, followed by the sound of boots moving quickly toward us. The rest of the mercenary crew had realized something was wrong, and they were coming. Edmund guided me behind a support column and stood in front of me, his posture calm, almost thoughtful, as if he were solving a difficult puzzle rather than facing armed strangers. I remember thinking that he looked more like a teacher preparing a lesson than a man about to face danger. "Stay behind me," he repeated. "No matter what you see, stay behind me." The first 2 mercenaries came around the corner together, weapons raised. Edmund moved before they could adjust their aim, closing the gap between them with startling speed. He guided one weapon harmlessly into the wall and redirected the man's own momentum until he stumbled and dropped where he stood. The second mercenary swung a metal baton, but Edmund simply was not where the strike landed. He shifted his weight, caught the arm mid-swing, and the weapon clattered uselessly to the floor along with the man holding it. I watched, breathless, as 3 more mercenaries arrived from the opposite corridor, boxing us in from both sides. Edmund did not panic. He glanced at me once, as if reassuring himself I was still safe, then turned back to face them with the same quiet focus. What followed was less like a battle, and more like watching water find every gap in a broken wall. Edmund moved constantly, redirecting each attack instead of meeting it head-on, using the mercenaries' own strength and speed against them. A punch became a fall. A charge became a stumble. Every motion he made seemed to already know what was coming next, as though he had lived this exact moment before and simply had to walk through it again. One mercenary, larger than the rest, managed to land a glancing hit against Edmund's shoulder. He staggered slightly, exhaling sharply, but did not slow down. Instead, he pressed forward, guiding the large man's arm until he lost his balance completely and dropped to one knee, unable to rise again. Within moments, all 5 mercenaries in that corridor were on the ground, unmoving, but breathing, and Edmund stood in the center of it, his chest rising and falling steadily, his expression calm. "We need to keep moving," he said, turning to me. "There is still a leader on this ship, and I intend to find him." We moved quickly through the corridors, Edmund leading with quiet confidence, checking each corner before allowing me forward. Twice more we encountered guards, and twice more Edmund handled them with the same careful precision, never using more force than necessary, never losing his composure, as though violence were simply another subject he had mastered long ago and set aside. Finally, we reached the command room, where a tall man in a long coat stood watching security feeds, unaware that his entire crew had already fallen. He turned as we entered, his eyes widening in surprise. "Impossible," he muttered. "You are just a tutor." Edmund tilted his head slightly, almost apologetically. "I used to be many things before that," he said. "Teaching turned out to be far more peaceful." The man reached for a weapon on the console, but Edmund crossed the room faster than seemed possible and caught his wrist before it moved another inch. Within seconds, the weapon was on the floor, and the man was pinned against the console, unable to move. "Who hired you to take her?" Edmund asked, his voice quiet but unshakable. The man hesitated, then spoke quickly, the words tumbling out, as though Edmund's calm presence demanded honesty more effectively than any threat could. He named a rival house, one that had long resented my family's growing influence among the star systems. Edmund listened carefully, memorizing every detail, before finally stepping back and allowing ship security, alerted moments earlier through a signal he had somehow managed to send, to take the man into custody. When it was finally over, Edmund sat down against the wall, breathing heavily for the first time since this had all begun. I sat beside him, my hands still trembling, though not from fear anymore. "You are not just a tutor," I said quietly. He gave a tired, almost embarrassed smile, the one I recognized from years of lessons together. "I was, a long time ago, someone very different," he admitted. "I hoped I would never need to be that person again." "Why did you hide it?" "Because peace is better than fear," he said simply. "People assume humans are gentle, harmless, easy to underestimate. Most of the time, that assumption is true, and it makes life simpler for everyone. But sometimes, when someone I care about is in danger, that gentleness has to step aside for a while." I thought about everything I had just witnessed, the calm in his eyes, the quiet precision of every movement, the way he had protected me without ever losing control of himself. I realized then that the galaxy had made a grave mistake in underestimating people like him. "Will you go back to hiding it?" I asked. "Yes," he said, without hesitation, "because the moment it stops being hidden is the moment it stops being a choice, and I would rather always choose gentleness first." We sat together in silence as the ship's security team secured the area and medical staff arrived to check on the unconscious guards, who I later learned would recover fully. My mother arrived not long after, relief flooding her face when she saw me safe, though her eyes lingered curiously on Edmund, who simply straightened his torn jacket and offered his usual polite, slightly embarrassed smile. From that day forward, my mother's advisors still called him the harmless tutor, and Edmund never corrected them. But I knew the truth now, a truth few in the galaxy ever learned, until it was far too late for them. Humans were not harmless. They were simply choosing, every single day, to be gentle. And I had seen, up close, exactly what happened when that choice was finally taken away from them.